I want to talk about our sponsor, Bet Online. Bet Online is your number one source for all your summer sports this season, from MLB, golf, NBA, and NHL playoff stats. All the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Bet Online, where the game starts. We are here to Field Rockets News. This is Rockets Field Podcast, presented by Believe Network and sponsored by Bet Online. And of course, I'm your host, Lashard Binkley. You can always find me on Twitter at Binkley Hoops. All my written work over at SB Nation or the Dream Shake. And before we introduce our special guest, I want to give my co-host a chance to introduce himself.
Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Vader. You can find me on Vader Sports on Twitter and also on Instagram for your Rockets-related news.
All right, and as you see, we have a very special guest. It's been a while since we've been on, but we all know it's the off season. So besides a couple of teams still playing, there's not a lot going on in the NBA right now. But I wanted to introduce a person I've had on the podcast several times, definitely a friend of the podcast, one of the best when it comes to scouting high school and basketball players. I always like to have him on the show because when it comes to my knowledge of, college basketball, it's definitely not that extensive. So I like to have people on the show that actually know what they're talking about, that follow these players all the time. We are joined by Tobias Bass of The Athletic. How you doing today, Tobias?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And before we get into it, of course, you've been on the show a few times, but if you kind of just let our listeners and viewers know, a little bit about your background and how you got into this.
So for now, I work at The Athletic. I just made 2 years 3 weeks ago, so that's been going well. Before I worked here, I did some stuff with Adam Zagoria. I was scouting for him, doing some high school, college basketball recruiting stuff. And I was also working at NB Sports as well. So this is my second year, going on year 3 at The Athletic, and I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Like I said, we've talked, several times, and I always appreciate you jumping on the show, and especially this year, because I think a lot of Rockets fans, just like myself, even covering a team, didn't really think that the Rockets would be a huge player in the draft. We knew that there was a possibility they were going to have a top 10 pick because of that they had Brooklyn's pick going into this offseason. But most people thought it was going to be around the 9-10 range. But we all, of course, we found out several weeks ago that the Rockets will be drafting in top 3. So, of course, that kind of kickstarted the draft coverage over here at Rocket Fuel. And that's kind of where I want to start. I wanted to get, you follow these players, all year long, not just the last few weeks. I wanted to get your top 5 kind of going into this draft, because from what I've seen in the mock draft, there's a lot of, uncertainty of, who's going to be in that top 5. I think the top 2 may be kind of more concrete, but at least as far as the top 5, I kind of seen it all over the place. So what's your top 5, as we, talk about today's draft?
So, I mean, the top 5, you're just going 1 through 5, I guess.
Just kind of like your 1 through 5. Not necessarily doesn't have to be in order, but yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess so. In this one, Sar, Zachary, Ricochet, we were struggling with that off air, but for sure. Klingon probably should be in the top 5, even if he's 5th. And then it's kind of hard too to go against with Reed Shepherd. I mean, his shooting splits are unbelievable. What he did at Kentucky, I'm sure he'll go in the top 5. And then for that 5th spot, you're looking at either Topic or probably Buzelis. That isn't my favorite 5 players, but if I was guessing in some order, that would probably be the top 5 that goes off the board.
Well, hold on. Who's your favorite? Because that's sort of me personally. Because there's now that we're going through the draft cycle and everything, I know one particular player who a lot of people like, but they're not sure if he's necessarily a fit here with the Rockets, is a guy like Rob Dillingham. Is he in one of your? Is he in your top 5? As far as favorites?
He's really, really, really talented. I guess the thing with him is just players like him, they really have to go to the right spot, because we've seen guards that'll be able to score like him, kind of be able to do some of those things, but they go to the wrong fit, and it's tough for them to succeed. So I think that he could probably be like a version of Lou Williams. I could see him kind of coming in the league over time and developing into that type of role, because the talent is there. I mean, he's unbelievable with the ball in his hands. I just think for him, the biggest thing would be fit. He probably needs to go somewhere where they're generally pretty young, where they can kind of let him grow as the team grows together. But the biggest thing with him is just going to be, maturity. Will he be able to continue to grow and be mature as a main ball handler on the floor?
Yeah, because kind of follow up on Rod Holland. I don't know. He sort of reminds me a little bit of Thompson as far as being yes, he played a lot of guard, but maybe his best position is going to be forward in the NBA because yes, he has height, he can score inside the paint. But do you think he can ever develop that jump shot? Because that's kind of the question now with Thompson is, yeah, he has a great athleticism, he great playmaking, great feel for the game, but will he ever be able to develop that jump shot? And do you think that Holland can develop that jump shot? And is that kind of why he hasn't been in a lot of people's top 5 right now?
So I've been watching Ron probably since the 8th grade. He's a Dallas kid, so I've been watching them for a long time. Love that kid, love his family, extremely hard worker, versatile defensively, rebounds, plays super hard. I think the jumper can get better. He's an interesting player shooting wise because he shoots it well from spots typically players his position don't. Like he shoots it, at least when I've been seeing him, he shoots the ball well from the corners, which you typically don't see. So I think that he can be respectable. I don't think he'll be, some 36, 37, 38% three-point shooter, but if he can be average, can he be that between 33.5 to 35%? I think that's reasonable. It may take some time, but his calling card is always going to be defensive versatility, slashing, and, just his motor.
Yeah, and he's like a 6'8" guy with like a 7'1" wingspan, I think they said, or something like that. So yeah, he is he's an intriguing prospect, but like for a team that's lacking shooting and needing shooting like the Rockets, he's kind of a tough sell. But man, I really like when I put the film on, like there's a lot to like about Ron Holland. And with a guy like Ime Udoka, like what he could do with a guy like that. Another kind of controversial person that people have been bringing up, and you didn't mention him, is Castle. What do you think about him?
So if you're talking about my favorite 5 players, he's probably one. Okay. He's probably my favorite, if not second favorite player in this class. He's another one. Jumper needs to improve, but he's a big guard who can facilitate. He can slash. He's powerful body, can get to the rim, finish around the rim, and he's a versatile defender. I think the Rockets may not make sense, but I think he's definitely a top 8 to 9 pick for sure. But yeah, he's probably my favorite player in this class.
Yeah, because I've been hearing like there's a lot of people on Twitter, for example, who like either really love him or they think that he's overrated. So I definitely wanted to ask your opinion on him because that's been like in spaces and things like that I've like listened in on. That's been like a point of contention. People have been arguing about whether or not he was going to like what's his projection? What do you think he's going to be? And is he worth a top 5 pick and things of that nature? So it's kind of cool to hear that you're pretty high on him as well.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of him. I mean, I think what he does well to translate. Like, again, the jumper, we know the jumper needs to get better. That's I won't argue with anyone talking about that. But it can get better. Could he be a high end Bruce Brown type of player? He's a little bigger than Bruce, but can he be some variation of that? And Bruce learned how to shoot over time too. She can make shots. So I think that Castle, his ability just to be able to have the ball in his hands to be a big playmaker and him be able to guard most positions on the floor, I think that translates. And he'll improve on the jumper. That's what shooting coaches are for. They'll help him get there, and he'll fix that over time.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Castle's another one that's kind of popped up on some people's mock drafts, even as high as number 3. But kind of going back to the top of the draft, when it comes to, of course, most people have been saying that Alex Sarr is going to go number 1. But just from what you've seen and what you've heard, do you think that there's kind of he's locked in at that position? And if he doesn't go number 1, do you think there's a chance he falls all the way to number 3? Because we know Washington has to pick at number 2. Nobody has any idea who they'll take when it comes to drafts. But do you think that's pretty much locked in at number 1 and number 2? Who's going in those positions?
I think so. I mean, I think for Atlanta, they have to consider all options, right? Because there's a chance they move some of their better players. Like there's a chance Trae Young isn't back there. So with them, this pick is probably going to look to be the future of their franchise going forward if they do decide to move out for Trae Young. So I think that he's probably the pick that makes sense. This draft is very unique. It's a lot of more role players than stars. So I think that, teams that do their due diligence and scout properly will end up coming out of this draft successfully. But I think that star he's probably the pick at 1.
And do you think Zachary is pretty much guaranteed a number 2, or is it kind of just hard to say because we've seen, like I said, with Washington draft history, that they don't always make the best decision when it comes to the draft?
Yeah.
Do you think that is Zachary's pretty much a lock at number 2 with Alex going number 1?
I think he goes 2. I think so. I think that just, and again, Washington, they're kind of all over the place. You really never know what they're gonna do, but I could see him going to, do they maybe reach into saying go after a Topic? Does that make sense for them? I could see them maybe trying to, dibble and dabble with some of that, but I think they'll take probably one of those foreign guys at 2.
And you just mentioned Topic. As far as, is there any concern with his injury history? I know just recently, like a couple of weeks ago or last week, he had another, it wasn't a major injury, but it seems like he's had several injuries over the last couple of years. Do you think there's any kind of injury concern with that? And will that possibly keep him out of the top 5?
I think there is some concern with the teams are going to try to get the best information about his medical history that they can get. But I mean, in this draft, I think that, and some people aren't really high on him like that, but I think in this draft you have to probably take him in the top 5. I think if the injury concerns are not just glaring, I think you probably have to take him that high.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me to my next question. Of course, the Rockets have the number 3 pick, and we'll get into just overall, do you think they should even keep that pick? For right now, they do have that number 3 pick. And I mean, if you're the Rockets, just as we just talked about with Zachary and with Alex Sarr going number 1, number 2, kind of with their makeup of their team right now, where, like Vader mentioned earlier, they don't have a lot of shooters. That was like one of their main problems this last season, was they just could not make outside shots. Do you consider a Reed Shepherd at number 3? Do you think he has a high enough ceiling, or who would you take at number 3 if you were in the Rockets front office?
If I would probably take 2 players, I'd probably take Reed Shepherd, and this next guy's not a shooter, but I would also consider Donovan Clingan. I would probably take one of those 2. Reed, obviously, with the main reason you just said, you need shooting. His shooting splits were unbelievable. I mean, so I think that just immediately jumps off the page. He was 53% from the field, 52% from 3. So that's super uncommon. So he's definitely someone I would take a look at. But I know we'll talk about this in a second, but I would be more intrigued if they tried to trade that pick. That's what I would do if I were them. The Rockets, they took a step forward this year. They don't have in my opinion, a ton that they need. Shooting's an issue, but just generally speaking, they don't have a ton that they need. So I wonder, could they trade that pick and maybe combine that with another asset on the team and maybe try to get like one of those younger stars that may be a free agent this year?
So let me ask you, as far as Reed Shepherd, because of course we heard a lot about his shooting. That's kind of been the main thing. But when it comes to MA, he's definitely one that looks heavily on the defensive end as well, and that kind of determines a lot of times whether you can even be on the court when you're playing on a team that MA is coaching. From what I've heard, he may not be an elite defender, but he's definitely not someone that other teams are going to try to take advantage of on the defensive end. Do you think that's one of his other stronger points, is maybe not his overall defense, but just his overall toughness and his hustle on the defensive end?
Yeah, I think that, defense is mainly effort and length. I think that if you're willing to try and put in the effort, I think that you can at least be serviceable. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the NBA. Are most of these guys playing defense consistently? Probably not for the most part. But I think that he does try and put in effort. When you have a Thompson, when you have a couple other guys on your team that defend, they'll help him. That'll help him, with those early, and he's a rookie, so people are going to try. They're going to try. But when you have other perimeter defenders on your team, that'll help his confidence. One, it'll be able to help him, just learning certain things, how to be in the right position.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned. I know his defense was pretty good in college. He had pretty good stocks, I believe. But I don't know. I forgot what he measured, but I don't think his wingspan was anything super impressive. So I just wonder. I know he had a really good vertical though. there's some things that he tested out really well at. So I don't know. I just wonder when you pick in third, and I like Reed Shepherd a lot. I just wonder like if the Rockets wanted to keep the pick, like I'm probably more in favor of trading the pick, like you're saying. We're gonna get to that.
Yeah.
But if they were to keep the pick, I don't know. Do you draft for fit, or do you like try to take a home run swing with a guy who maybe you might consider has a higher upside? Like, what do you think a guy like Donovan Clingan's upside is?
Could he be like Pirtle? Could he be like Pirtle? He played with the Spurs. I think he's with the Raptors again. I believe they got him back. Could he be some variation there? I like Clingan. He had a phenomenal tournament. He was unbelievable in tournament, especially the last 3-4 games or so. And in the past, the Rockets have been looking for a five. They were talks last year. They were trying to get involved with Brook Lopez and a few others. So I think that's an issue you can solve. You obviously have Alp, you have Jabari, so there's kind of a log jam with the minutes at that 4 or 5 spot. But like you said, if you're concerned about Reed's defense, wingspan, if you have to pick somebody, I like Clingan. If you have to pick somebody there.
And another player I wanted to ask you about, because he's been, especially since I started kind of looking into this, is Montes Bacelis. He seems like he's one of the more versatile players in the entire draft. He did struggle a little bit last year, with his shooting, but just from interviews I've heard him talk about, he said that he's not really overly concerned because in the past he has been a better shooter overall. What's kind of his upside, and is he another player that could possibly go in the top 5, or because I think one thing the Rockets are missing is versatility at the 4 position. Yeah. They do have, Atari Eason, of course, who's coming back from injury, like you mentioned, Jabari Smith. Yep. But even with Jabari Smith, he's more of a set shooter. He's not going to really take too many people off the dribble. He's still, working on his overall skill set. But it seems like with Bacelis, he's kind of already at the point where he is a multifaceted, especially on the offensive end type of player. So what's kind of your opinion on him?
So you remember maybe like a year and a half ago, they had him going 1. He was projected to be the number 1 pick in the draft. So he's super talented. He can score from all 3 levels. I know that he has some issues. He struggled a little bit in the G League Ignite, which is expected. He's at the time 18, 19 years old, playing against grown men, so that was expected. But he's super talented. I think he probably goes in the top 5 to 6, especially at the Pistons. I think the Pistons really do like him. It wouldn't surprise me if he didn't go maybe to Houston. They probably would pick him. But he's like you said, he's a multi-talented guy. He can play multiple positions. He's very versatile. He's a tad skinny. I don't know defensively, will he be able, because he's going to be with a 3-4. Can he physically even guard those positions, especially early on, because he's going to need the minutes. So that's maybe an area of concern. But offensively, I think that he has some stuff in his toolbox that'll definitely translate. He can be able to be successful there.
And you brought up the NBA, G League Ignite, who we all know now is kind of dissolved after last season. And that kind of plays into a lot of these scouting reports as well. Like, how do you, as far as when you're looking at these players and they play for the NBA, the G League Ignite team, does that factor into kind of your scouting? Because we know that one of the reasons why they're dissolving is because it didn't seem like it was a lot of teaching going on with a lot of the players there. And we know that from, here when Jalen Green was playing with the Ignite, which I think personally that kind of set him back a little bit. And that's why it's taking him some time to get to where he is right now. But how much do you factor into that, okay, they played before the G League Ignite, and if they would have went to college, maybe we would have been seeing a different type of player?
I'm always in favor of the college component. I just think it's just a better model. And I think one thing with the Ignite, the problem was they really haven't had any star players come out. They were getting some of these top 7, top 6 recruits in the country.
Yeah.
And they're fine. Like Jalen Green, he's a solid player. Kaminga's solid when they put him on the floor. Some of the other guys are not even in the NBA. So I think that was one of the bigger issues there was where's the star power? We were getting these highly recruited guys. Why aren't they becoming all-stars, So but I think it does play a significant role in, into your scouting. Those players that he's playing against, some of those guys may or may not play in the NBA, but physically it looks like that. So what does he look like going against those type of players? He'll get better naturally, but I think it does play. You have to consider, because that's the most recent film that you have of those players. So I think you definitely have to consider it.
Yeah, and like I said, with Jalen, it did take him a little bit more time, and like I say, you haven't really had any just breakout stars since
Yeah.
they started the G League Ignite, and
And Scoot Henderson really struggled too out the gate.
that's another one.
Portland.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's another one that kind of factors into all this when you're talking about scouting these players. But another thing I wanted to ask you about, as we're starting to see more and more international players just kind of taking over the NBA, and we just talked about earlier how the top two players possibly are going to be from France after last year, of course, with Victor Wembanyama being the number one overall pick. Is that kind of just how it's going to be for a while now, the trend where it's going to be a lot more international players in the top 10 and maybe one or two stateside players?
I think there's definitely going to be more of them coming just over the next several years. There's going to be several in this draft to get drafted, but I think this year was just a weaker draft than most. You know, I think this would just happen to just be the year that it was weaker. You know, so and that's no disrespect to the guys in the draft. I think they'll be. You know, I wish them a good long successful career, but this draft just was weak. That's just what it is. Period. It
We
wasn't
got some
that. I
guys
think
coming up
going
next.
forward,
Some guys coming up
yeah,
next draft that's stateside that look
right.
pretty good. Cooper
Right,
Flag.
right. And I think, yeah, right, yeah. And I think, yeah, I think that it'll be able to it'll eventually correct itself. But you know, every X amount of years we have bad drafts, and this will be this one. And there'll be some gems in this draft. There's some players we might not even talk about. You know, they may come out of nowhere and be stars. They might be an all-star, very serviceable player. That happens every year. And I think that this is a draft that I think scouts really just have to do their research, get their intel, and just be on top of their game because there's some good players in this draft that you can get, especially in those later rounds.
Yeah, and just kind of just thinking back to last year's draft, and that's actually something I want to talk about in the second half. I actually want to start off with that. It's just talking about the Rockets draft last season and how the two players that they drafted, Amen and Cam, how they kind of played out throughout the season. I definitely want to get your opinion on that. But yeah, I guess it's kind of it goes in cycles, just like anything else. Like we're seeing now where the NBA is being dominated by players like Luka and Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid and players like that. But eventually they'll kind of work his way back around, and maybe we'll see Anthony Edwards or players like that kind of just eventually take over the league and become MVP type players. But what I want to talk about in the second segment, I want to also like to talk about last year's draft, get Tobias' opinion on that. I also want to get a little bit more into what we were talking about earlier as far as trading that pick instead of keeping the number 3 overall pick. And I also want to get Tobias' opinion as far as sleepers in the draft that maybe a lot of people are not talking about, and something that we should be paying a little bit more attention to as far as what players are kind of standing out maybe towards the end of the draft that a lot of people aren't talking about. So we'll be talking about all of that in the second segment, so please stick around. And welcome back to Rocket Fuel Podcast, presented by the Believe Network and sponsored by Bet Online. And in the first segment, of course, we talked about the top 5, or at least who we think was going to go in the top 5. And we talked about some of the other players that may be a little bit outside of the top 5, but are definitely interesting prospects. And we also talked about who the Rockets possibly take at 3. And we also spent a little bit of time talking about should they even trade that pick. But before we get into whether they should trade that pick or not, I wanted to get Tobias' opinion on, of course, last year's Rockets team. The Rockets had another couple of players that they took in the top 20 last season, and Thompson and Cam Whitmore, who both at times looked like they should have possibly been the a top 2 or 3 pick in the entire draft. So I wanted to kind of get your opinion on that. As far as going into the draft, what did you think about Amen and Cam? And did they kind of exceed your expectations last year, or were you kind of expecting what they did for the Rockets last season?
Well, first, I really love what the Rockets did. I mean, they were at one point they were considering taking Cam at 4.
Yeah.
And you get him at what, 20, I believe.
20.
So that was an unbelievable get for them. And they came in and they were productive. Both of them were. They especially Cam. He came in right away. They were concerned about the hip issue or whatever. But to him, play 47 games, averaged 12 points, 4 rebounds. He had a hell of a season, and I think the same thing with Thompson as well. He made the all-rookie team. He's very good defensively. So those are 2 building blocks for your franchise going forward that you don't even have to worry about. And I think that something that they needed were those 2-3 wingy type of players, and they got 2 of them. So Like I said, going forward, you don't even have to worry about that position really going forward. You can find other things that you need.
And you kind of mentioned as far as needing two, three type players. Do you think ultimately Thompson's position is really going to be, because we kind of talked a little bit about earlier with Ron Holland, how yes, he plays some guard, but ultimately he's probably better as a forward. Do you think that's ultimately kind of where is going to end up, is more at the small forward, sometime even a small ball forward, because he did play that position, especially when Alperen Şengün went out with the injury. He played a lot of four for the Rockets at the end of the season. Do you think ultimately he doesn't really end up as a primary point guard and more of a slashing forward?
I think that he could be that main ball handler maybe with the second unit, but I think that, the NBA changes every year.
Yeah.
You're seeing a lot of fours, even some fives, they're playing undersized. You see that all the time. Some of these fours, they're 6'6", 6'7", they're not these big 6'9", 6'10" guys like we've seen in the past. There's a couple teams that do that, but for the most part, not really. So I think that if you put him at the small ball four, it's fine. He's just as tall as anyone else's four.
Yeah.
Aaron Gordon at the four, he's what, 6'8", maybe 6'8.5". They're around the same size, so it's not a gigantic. It's not a big deal for them to do that. And he plays so hard, super athletic with long arms. He'll be fine.
I think his handle is kind of holding him back. How fixable do you think that is at this point?
I think it's fixable. I mean, he's what, 21? Yeah, it's fixable. He got to get in the gym, and they're known for their hard work. So I think that if anyone can fix it, it'll be fine. I don't think he's going to be out there and just be some super duper ball handler, but he just need to be able to make the right reads, make the right plays, and he'll be okay. I think that's fixable.
Yeah, because we saw when he was able to have some control with the ball. I mean, he's a devastating athlete. So I would love for him to tighten that up. I'm actually more I'm more hopeful that he can get that resolved than him actually developing a consistent 3-pointer.
Yeah.
I feel like he got a lot more.
Yeah.
There's a lot more that's gonna have to happen for his shot to come around. But we saw this dude putting up like triple doubles and near triple doubles when he was a starter, with two pretty glaring holes in his game. So that just tells you how high his basketball IQ is, how good he is, how athletic he is. For him to be able to go out and play like that without, a reliable jump shot and with the kind of a shaky handle, and for him to still go out there and play like that, it's pretty impressive. So I feel like if he can tighten his handle up a little bit, I don't know. I feel like sky's the limit for him, honestly.
Yeah, because he has natural gifts that you just can't teach, and we were able to see some of that last year. So the handle will get better. Like I said, he'll probably be able to fix that more than the jumper, at least early on in his young career. But for him to be able to put that up, like you said, with those two glaring holes in his game, is impressive. And there's other players like that around the league. They different player. But Jeremy Sohan, he sometimes he gets stuff done. He's super awkward and kind of running around doing whatever he's doing, but he plays, and he sometimes he gives you productive minutes. So there's players that are around the league that can do that. Not comparing Thompson and Sohan, but you get my point. There are players with glaring holes that can find valuable minutes on the floor and get things done.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to put you on the spot here, but before we move on to the next topic, I want to ask you, if you're looking at it just from your point of view, who do you think has the higher upside between Cam and Amen? Because some of the things we talked about with Amen that he struggles with as far as just shooting and anything outside the paint, that's not something necessarily that Cam struggles with. Of course, there's a lot of things that he still has to work on as far as on the defensive end, becoming a better passer. But if you're just looking at it from your point of view, who do you think has a higher upside, or is it still just kind of too early to tell on that?
If you're asking me, I'll probably say Cam Whitmore to me. Okay. I just think, like you said, some of the things that Thompson is working on, Cam kind of already has that. Cam's issue was health. If health wasn't a concern, he's probably not a Rocket anyway. True. He probably goes last year in the top 7. I mean, you saw, I think beginning of the year last year, obviously we knew Wemby was going 1, but they had Cam at one point going like 2 or 3 at one point last year. You go way back before he got hurt. So the Rockets basically got a top 4 pick at 20. So again, assuming if he was healthy all of last year, he's probably not a Rocket. He's probably somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember there was several articles and people
Yeah,
talking to them that Rockets, they were actually considering taking them at number 4, and then of course if
yeah,
they do that, then they don't have Amen. So to get both of those players, in one draft is pretty amazing. And that kind of leads me into the next topic that I definitely want to talk about was the whether the Rockets should even keep that number 3 pick. Let me ask you. You said earlier that you would actually feel like it's better for the Rockets to trade that pick.
yeah.
Does that go with it? Does it depend on who's actually there? Let's say that Sar somehow does fall to number 3. Does that kind of change your mind, or are you still of the mind that said that this draft is not as strong as previous drafts, and that the Rockets would be better off with, let's say, trading number 3 and Dylan Brooks for like a Mikal Bridges or somebody like that? No
Mm.
matter what, are you still trading that pick, or it just depends on who's there?
I think you have to consider it all. If someone does fall there and you feel that at 3, I mean, you're picking at 3. So most players you can get, right? That's just generally, you can get most of the players in this draft at 3. So if they get to 3 and Sar is still there and you love Sar, go for it. Now the problem is the logjam. You have
Yeah.
Jabari Smith, who you drafted 2 years ago. You got Seguin at the 5, who's unbelievable. How does that work? Like, what is the sale that what is the minutes like? How do you roster construct that? So I think that they should. You could maybe move down. Could you move down and address another issue? Maybe get some other assets, or could you just trade the pick in general and add another player? Maybe get him Mikal Bridges. Maybe get another one of those young up and coming players like that.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of the question as far as trading down or just trading completely out of it, because I don't think there's an easy answer for the Rockets because they're kind of in limbo. They were better last year, but they still weren't
Yeah,
contender. Nobody expected them to, even though they were close to the Warriors as far as making the playoffs,
yeah,
nobody really thought they were going to go any further in the playoffs. So they're kind of in that middle section where they want to win now, but they still got all these young players on the team. So I think that's definitely something that's going to be the big question on is whether should they even keep that pick? Because now you're adding another young guy onto a squad where you already have
yeah.
several guys that are under 21.
I have a potentially hot take. It might not be hot. I don't know. I personally think Segun is y'all's best player, personally, for the short
Yeah,
and potentially in the long term for me. So if if that's the case, some of those guys got to get moved.
yeah,
That's just for me. Some of them have some of them. I think some of them may have the ceiling is they're approaching their ceiling. I don't know if some of them can get any better than what they are, despite the age. They're going to
So
get
so
better, right? Because
which players do you think is close to the ceiling?
I, I like Jalen Green. I
Yeah,
think that he's close to his ceiling, and he's a good player. This is not me
yeah,
talking about him at all. I think he's a good player, but okay, this is what he's going on to year 4, I
yes,
believe. Okay, it's year 4. Is he gonna turn into Bradley Beal? Is he gonna turn into Devin Booker? At what point? What point is he gonna turn into this all-star caliber player?
yeah,
He
good point.
might. He's more than talented enough. This is not a talent issue. He's more than talented. He can definitely do it. But we're waiting. Maybe year 4 is the year. We get to year 4 and he's about the same. We going into year 5. Is he ever gonna be that? And if not, Alp's my best player. If Alp's my best player, we're gonna have to put some perimeter defensive shooting players around him that can. That's what I would do. And maybe Jalen Green, he can continue to develop and get better. But I think that may be that may be something to consider. Jabari Smith, super talented. He's kind of in some ways the odd man out in some of those situations. Sometimes he's getting
Yeah,
fourth, fifth player shots. How does that fit? So it's not a matter of are they good enough or can they develop. This just may not be the place. One of them may go to a different team and he may really pop. It's not the Rockets' fault. It's just that how their team is constructed, they may not be able to grow into what it is. Different example, but you look at like Evan Mobley. His rookie year, we thought this dude was going to take over the league. We thought that he was
yeah,
going to be like, because he honestly, if you look at him from a microscope, he looks similar to Anthony Davis. He looks very similar, especially at that age. He looks similar. I'm not saying he's going to be Anthony Davis, but he does similar things. He can do similar things. Well, we're what, 2 years down the line? We don't even talk about Evan Mobley like that anymore.
Yeah,
Not his fault.
true.
They have Darius Garland down in the Spider. They take most of those shots. So his development, in my opinion, is being altered. It's not his fault. It's just that if you took when they weren't on the team and when they were hurt, he was balling. When he comes back, he get third, fourth place shots. Same thing with Jabari. I think it's the same thing. Same thing with Green. He's getting the shots up. I just don't know if he's going to develop into an all-star.
Yeah, I mean the clock is obviously ticking on those guys because
Yeah.
the thing that we've been talking about a lot is, it's time to pay some of these dudes. Those contract
Yeah.
situations are about to
Yep.
enter the chat, enter the conversation. And so when you start talking money and investing, a lot of your salary cap in the guys, you got to be sure. So yeah, I'm 100% with you on, this is a very interesting offseason for the Houston Rockets. And I think
Yeah.
probably the offseason and then leading up to the trade deadline, because I do think, like you said, they're going to have to probably make some decisions on one or two of these dudes that we are like considering to be in our core. And they unfortunately, may not be here because that's just how what it is. Like you said, they may go on and flourish elsewhere, but from a team construction and a team building perspective, it's like you have to start identifying who you want to be here, who you want to pay, and what pieces you need to put around them. And so Raphael Stone has some tough decisions to make pretty soon.
Yeah, the fit is always going to be more important than the talent. And and granted, these are good problems to have. There are a lot of teams in the NBA right now, a lot of them that wish they had this potential problem. Sure.
Yeah.
A lot of them wish they had a Jalen Green and Jabari Smith that they even could potentially trade or do whatever they want with them. So these are good problems. It's just a matter, like you said, the clock is ticking. You gotta start paying these dudes. Only so many can get paid, and we have picks, we have guys to draft. So something has to give.
And in an ideal world, obviously, because you took Jalen Green third overall in the draft,
Yeah.
you want to see him develop into that like alpha scorer, somewhat to what we saw like guys like Booker and Anthony Edwards being able to do in the playoffs, take over some playoff games and things of that nature. And you want to see, Alperen Sengun continue to develop, and then you have a good 1-2 punch. Will that happen? I don't know. Like this is they pretty much have until. I mean, these decisions might happen over the summer, but I feel like if Jalen comes out and struggles, first half of the season, he may be on the trade block. I feel like if or if he comes out and really establishes himself, and you see that he and Sengun, it's still a clunky fit, and you can't figure out how to get those two to like flourish simultaneously. And that, and I think a lot of that is on coaching. We've seen Jalen and Sengun have good games at the same time. So I'm not saying that, but there's definitely it's going to be a very, very interesting first half of the season for the Rockets.
Yeah, it's in a nutshell, in different teams, but you see the little. I always find it funny. They have like the Jokic, Demonis Sabonis, Al P, the little the little transition period, right? Why that works in Sacramento, you have Fox. The rest of those guys, 3-and-D, shooting caliber players. With the Rockets, they have a Jabari Smith, who was a top 4, top 3 pick, who's mega talented. You paid Fred VanVleet, who's a champion, who won a championship team, who was cooking. You have Dylan Brooks, who's made deep playoff runs, who's been super productive in the NBA. And then you have Jalen. So that's the thing. If you had more shooting, it probably works. It probably works, Jalen, and it probably does work. But for how their team is constructed, and who you just paid, you might have to do something different.
What kind of fit do you think? And say, I wouldn't mind bringing Mikal Bridges in. I kind of feel like when you start talking to Brooklyn, they're gonna want that pick swap next year. Yeah. And I feel like that 25 pick swap, man. I feel like that might be like a deal breaker. You know what I mean? Because like you said, next year's draft is. I'm sorry. What did you say, Tobias?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I can't do that one.
Yeah. And I feel like when you start getting in that conversation with them, okay, we'll give you pick 3, and we'll give you, some contracts to make it work, and maybe we'll give you something else to sweeten it. and you send us Mikal Bridges, but like I just can't see a world where we get that deal done without them asking for that 2025 pick. And like you said, next year's draft is actually a good draft, and they are not a good team. So like
at
you're
all.
potentially like, you know what I mean? You could be trading, Cooper Flag to them. You know what I mean? So, and that's like a high end scenario, but like I don't know. I feel like that one little thing right there might be like a thing that like prevents any deal with Brooklyn from happening. But what do you think? But that aside, what do you think about Mikal Bridges' fit with Houston?
I love the fit. I mean, I think that dude's still underrated. You saw when he first got to Brooklyn, the type of numbers that he was putting up. I think that he's a immediate like plug and play guy. He's a 16, 17 around that caliber guy. He can guard your best. He can guard the other team's best player. He can make shots. I think him playing for Team USA in the summertime last year really, really like helped him, mature as a player and learn different things. So I definitely think he would be one to get. I guess the other question is, we know the 2025 draft is loaded. The question would be is how valuable do the Rockets? How valuable is Mikal Bridges to them? Because if he's the piece that they feel that help them take this jump, well, then I think you have to do it. Then if that's the case, because if you get him that 2025 kid, there's a chance he could be a star, but he's still unproven. He's still a kid. I know what Bridges is. So, we've seen, unfortunately, a lot of guys get drafted out. They can't play. So if you value Bridges as that level to get us over the hump, I think you have to do it.
And another thing about Bridges is he never misses games. I don't think he's missed a game since high school, which is pretty amazing, especially in this day and age with load management. I think that's a skill in itself, just being able to be on the court. Yeah. So, I've always loved Bridges' game. Of course, he took a step back last year, but you also got to factor in that Brooklyn was horrible. And we know, being down here in Houston, how being on a horrible team can affect your overall play. So that's going to be a really interesting thing, because I know Rafael Stone did just get his contract extension, but that's the type of move that can really either propel you forward or almost cost you your job. If you trade for Mikal Bridges, and let's say you trade away that 2025 pick, and that 2025 pick, he comes out and he's the best rookie in the time. It's kind of you never really know. Like you said, you don't really know with any of these players. I guess we knew what Victor Wembanyama was going to be, but for the most part, you really don't know what these high draft pick players are going to be, because they never played in the NBA, and it takes some time for them to develop that. So it's going to be a really interesting, like Victor said, offseason, because the Rockets have a lot of decisions to make, not just with the draft, but if they're going to sign Alperen Sengun and Jalen Green beyond their current contracts. And like you said, you think Alperen Sengun is the best player on the team. I think majority of people last year thought Alperen Sengun before his injury was the best player on the team. So, that's a big factor into whether they're going to give these guys max contracts. I don't see them giving Jalen Green a max contract regardless. Sengun, possibly, but I just think that the Rockets are really still kind of figuring out, okay, is either one of these guys going to be our franchise player at the end of the day?
You don't think if we get March Jalen Green, who was second only to Luka Doncic in Player of the Month voting, you don't think they'll give him a max if you see that like the first half of the season?
Oh, if we get March Jalen Green, yes. But that's the big question. Are you getting March Jalen Green, or are you getting October through February Jalen Green? So that's the big question.
And it's interesting to me, because it's always interesting how much better players play when they're coming into their contract year. It is unbelievable. It's amazing how the money just is always, it's that one little thing. They'll be whatever the first couple of years, but as soon as that contract year comes around, they start doing things you didn't know they could do. It's always so like
I didn't know you could make that skip pass. You never made it before. Now all of a sudden,
right. You pay them, and then that skip pass, we don't see that often anymore. It's always super interesting. So I think, but yes, what y'all are saying is right. I think that if he comes out there and he's playing that way, you got to pay him, because the talent is there. This is not a talent thing. He's one of the more talented players in the league, but I want to see the consistency. And I drafted you what
We all
top
do.
3. You got to be all-star, bro. That's just what it is. At least all-star caliber. I know you're in the West is going to be hard, but
Yeah.
you got to get to that. You got to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what it's going to come down to for him coming up this season with his contract. One more thing I want to get to before we get to the final topic, which kind of ties into the free agency and who the Rockets can potentially bring in or who want to actually come play for the Rockets. We talked about this in the past. Just some of the things you heard about the Rockets organization, before they, this was before they brought in MA and kind of changed the culture. But what have you heard or what do you feel is kind of reputation of the Rockets now? Because we know before it was kind of it was a hot mess. Let's just be honest. The previous 3 seasons with, Coach Silas and all the mess that was going on, even with John Wall and things like that. But what do you think is kind of the perception around the league as far as when it comes to the Rockets organization now?
I think that the perception has definitely changed. You got some adults in the room. It's not just a bunch of kids throwing everything on the walls anymore. I think that you saw last year, they took a step forward. They look better. You didn't hear as much chaotic things, just going around. So I think that the organization is viewed as a organization that's going in the right direction, which is a good thing when you're attracting free agents and other type of players.
Yeah.
So I think they're headed in the right direction. I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, that's kind of the determining factor with a lot of these free agents. I mean, yes, the money is a big factor as well, but at the end of the day, a lot of these players can get this. If you're going for top tier players, they can get the money from any organization. So a lot of times, the way the organization is ran, it definitely factors into that. One more topic I wanted to get to before we wrap up the show is something you mentioned a little bit earlier, where you were saying like some of your favorite players are not even really in the top of the draft, and maybe that ties into the Rockets possibly trading back in this draft and getting a future draft pick. But what's some of the players that we should be looking at that maybe a lot of people around the country and scouts and just people on social media aren't talking about?
One me jumps off the page for me is Jalen Tyson. That was at Cal. He had a great year, and his story was interesting. He went to 3 schools in 3 years, but he was able to figure it out. He's another Dallas kid. Been watching them for a long time. Actually spent some time with him, know him personally. Great kid, and averaged 19 points a game, 7 rebounds, shot 36% from 3. He kind of reminds me of like a high end version of Caleb Martin, the one that's with the Miami Heat. He's a little bit bigger, so he'll rebound the ball. But if you're getting him, I'm looking at some mock draft. They have him going a little around 25, maybe a couple spots below, a couple spots after. If you're getting that, I think that's a make because you're a playoff team at that point. So you're getting a 20-plus minute guy off the jump. 6'7", 6'8", can handle the ball, can defend. Cal was terrible this year, so he really had to be their point forward. He was scoring a lot of the points, rebounding, guarding the best players. So I think you're getting a player that's he's super seasoned here. They can come in and make a direct impact. He's one for sure. Keyshawn George at Miami, major fan of that kid. Switzerland dude, big guard. I think he's like 6'8" and a quarter, can really shoot the ball. He was kind of in a log jam there at Miami. He was getting 4th, 5th player shots. I think that he's one he could actually pop in a couple of years, especially if he goes to the right team. Tyler Smith, Houston kid, went to Bush High School before he ended up going to overtime elite than the Ignite last year. I think that he could be I think he has a chance. I think he has star potential. I think that dude could be like an all-star down the line. He'll be someone that probably goes around 20. Big major fan of him. And then last one would be probably Carlton Carrington at Pittsburgh. He started off the season super, super high. I think they were projecting him to go like in the top 9, top 10 at one point. Shooting struggled towards the end of the year, but he's another team. A lot of these guys are probably going to play in the G League for a little bit, but it's just, will they be able to get better? I think he's a kid that he may spend some time in the G League for a little bit, but I think he'll be successful. And then last one is Jalen Bridges at Baylor. I think he could come in and be like a Robert Covington role. I think he can come in and be that big 6'8.5", 3-and-D guy. So those are some of my sleepers that I'm looking at for this year's draft.
I want to ask you about Ware. What do you think about him?
Like Ware too. I mean, he was a kid at Oregon. We thought he was going to be a top 10 pick coming out as a freshman. So all the talent is there. He can score on all 3 levels. The motor kind of comes and goes. I think he showed more of that this year, but super talented kid. He's one that'll probably late back of the lottery, maybe right after, but again, he's another one that's the one that if they get him right, you're looking at, you might have a gem. I think that's one that could he could be a gem down the line.
Yeah, because I remember last year when we thought he might enter the draft, I was like trying to decide who I liked better out of him and Derek Lively, and so I was kind of like looking at both of those just because they were both like really highly thought of, and then they didn't like really produce as much as you probably would have expected. I don't know, like so.
Different players, but yes, Ware has the offensive skill set. He's offensively just more naturally gifted. Lively has what you see now, the athleticism, the shot blocking. He's perfect spot, and perfect spot. He's doing well.
Yeah. One more player I want to ask you about before we wrap up the show, of course, is Jamal Shead. You know, a lot of us know him down here in Houston. I've kind of seen different reports on him as far as how he's been performing this offseason, but where do you think he can possibly go, and kind of just what's your overall thoughts on his game going into the NBA?
I want the Timberwolves to draft him so bad. I think he'd be a really good fit there. He's learning from a super vet, Mike Conley, who's been, Mike Conley has a interesting perspective on the NBA. He went from being, a high draft pick to a second, third option to, dealing with some injuries and got moved. So I think that he would be a perfect mentor for Jamal Shead. And Jamal's a guy that he works hard. I remember when he was a freshman at Houston and Kelvin was tearing him, limb from limb, and we didn't know if he was going to make it. Now look at him. So, I'm a super big fan of that kid, and I would love to see a team like Minnesota who has a young core who's good. They need a backup. They need a point guard for the future.
Yeah.
Go draft Jamal Shead.
Yeah, that sounds like a great fit for Jamal Shead, because we saw in the playoffs that's one of the main things that Minnesota didn't have was any type of secondary ball handler, and that definitely came back to bite them against Dallas in the West Conference Finals. Before we wrap up the show, Tobias, first off, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Every single year you come on, you definitely give us a lot of knowledge that we need, because we're following the NBA all season, and this definitely helps us out as far as what players are going to be out there during the draft. So I appreciate you coming on the show.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm sure, we'll be talking more and more as the draft approaches. But yeah, whenever you guys want to have me on, thank you. And this is one of my favorite podcasts I actually get to come on. So thank you guys for having me on.
We appreciate you, man. And I still talk to Tobias every now and again on Twitter. So he does great work on there. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. Like he's covering, he's doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and people are like kind of eating off of his hard work. Go to his site when you want to, get some information on some players, and then you can go into like another space and sound like you know what you're talking about when you follow Tobias.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And before we wrap it up, why don't you let everybody know where they can find that great content again?
You can follow me on Twitter at Tobias_Bass. That's TOBIAS_Bass, like the fish. I work at The Athletic. We're going to be producing a bunch of content over the NBA draft, scouting reports, etc. that's coming up over the next couple of weeks. The transfer portal is basically done, so I hope. But, you can follow me on Twitter for any updates on where some of these prospects may be ending up.
Absolutely. Make sure you follow Tobias. He's definitely one of the best in the business. And thank you again for coming on. And, of course, Vader, appreciate you coming on. We took a little bit of break there, but we're going to be getting right back into it as we ramp up the draft and free agency and whatever other craziness that goes on in off season. So appreciate you coming on as usual.
Of course, man. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, I enjoyed my little break, but yeah, it's time to get going, man. Season is it'll be here before you know it. We got to do the summer league and all that other fun stuff. But yeah, it's always a pleasure, man.
Absolutely. And of course, that's going to do it for today's show. We always appreciate support. Let us know down in the comments. What do you think the Rockets should do with that number 3 pick? Who you think they should draft, or whether they should trade that pick or not? As usual, we appreciate the likes. We appreciate the subscribers. If you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because we're definitely going to be bringing you great content all off season. And as usual, make sure you check out the next episode of the Rockets Fuel Podcast.